invasion into Europe. And after D-Day, remember now the Nazis are surrounded on three sides. You have the Russian army coming from the east. You have a British and British and American army coming up through Italy. And now when they cross the English Channel into France, they're surrounded on three sides. And if you could look at Europe from 30,000 feet above after June 6, 1944, you would see that it's over for Nazi Germany. They're surrounded. It's just a matter of time after that. We talked about the plan where they had to invade various parts of Normandy Beach. Getting out onto Normandy Beach took a lot of guts. They overwhelmed the beach with sheer numbers of people. And once they get onto the beach at Normandy, they start unloading supplies, and now the army is going to have a much easier time taking on Nazi Germany. Now, here's the last part of this that we didn't get to the other day. You can see in June 1944, after D-Day, the green line is where they kind of get to on that first day, in the first few days of the invasion, right? But they're going to sweep through France, and the idea is that we've got to push the Nazis back into Germany and eventually free France. Okay? And it's going to take a long time to do this. It's going to take a couple months to push through France. June 1944 is the D-Day invasion, but the Nazis are not going to go quietly. All right? They're going to put up a fight. However, August 1944, 2 months after the invasion, the city of Paris is liberated. Hooray! Here are the Parisians. Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the Free French, he's in the big hat there, the tall guy. He's leading the French people back into the city. And look, it's really important here, too, that the Americans and the British said, when we recapture the city of Paris, it's got to be the French who go back in first. It's their city. We don't want to look like we're occupying the city. We were just returning it to the French people. And Charles de Gaulle was, of course, 100% on board with that idea. And you can see they're marching through in the background. You can see the Arc de Triomphe, the famous French architecture that's there. Now, here's the weird thing about this that people don't realize. When they freed the city of Paris from Nazi control, it's unscathed pretty much, meaning that there doesn't look like no real fighting took place. The Nazis abandoned the city before there was any real fighting within the city. But Hitler had wanted his generals before they left Paris. He wanted them to actually destroy all the important landmarks and monuments, like the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, anything of architectural or cultural value. He wanted to destroy. Right? Why would Hitler tell his generals to do that? Why does he give them an order to destroy all the important stuff of cultural value? What is it? You're on the right track with that. You guys ever know people who are really petty? If I can't have it, no one can. And that's Hitler realizes he's going to lose, but he wants to inflict as much damage as possible. And he's like, you know what? We'll take out some of the most important cultural monuments. Now, luckily for the world, and particularly for France, the German generals don't have the heart to go through with it. They kept giving excuses back to Hitler and Nazi leadership, saying they were working on it, the situation was stalled, they were planning to do it, but they had no intention of blowing up important artifacts, particularly when they knew the war was lost. Right? So the French get their city back. Thankfully, it's intact. You see here also, the French are excited to see the American soldiers. They appreciate the American and British soldiers who've helped free their country, particularly their capital city. And you can tell by this picture on the bottom, what do you think the atmosphere was like in Paris, France that night that the French government had been restored? Look at the people in the background. What do you see in the building? People. What are they like? They're like hanging out the windows, right? Do you think this was like a party type of atmosphere? Oh my gosh, yes. What do you think happened with the alcohol? Lots of it, and it flowed freely. And let me tell you something. I'm not trying to be gross or disgusting, but people have written books about this sort of thing, about the liberation of Paris. And if you were an American or British soldier that night, what do you think was happening for you? The women were really appreciative of the soldiers who helped restore their city. And by really appreciative, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? American and British soldiers, you don't have to speak the French language to understand what the French women were ready to celebrate. All right? Gosh, wow, the French women. Would you like to go home with me? That's my God. I hope no French people ever hear this. All right. So they're pretty excited. But even with Paris being restored and France almost completely freed, all right, the war's not over just yet. Okay. Now, Hitler starts to realize that I'm going to lose this war if something drastic does not happen. So Hitler says, we're desperate. We've got to do something. All right. So Hitler says, what we're going to do is we are going to throw one last Hail Mary. We're going to put all of our resources into one last major attack. And they said, basically, we've been on the run since D-Day. So what we're going to do is we're going to push everything we've got. It's like if you're playing poker, you're pushing your chips all in. And Hitler says, we're going all in right here. We're going to put all of our resources into one major attack. All right. And the attack they refer to as the Battle of the Bulge. Here's why. The dark gray over here is near the German-French border. And this shows you the dark gray is where the German troops were lined up at. And when they throw all their efforts into this last attack against the British and the American troops, they're able to push them back to where this dark black line is. They create a bulge in the line. Okay. And American and British troops were taken a little bit by surprise because they thought and they realized that the war is over. It's just a matter of time. But they're surprised at this one last major attack. All right. Plus, this Battle of the Bulge takes place in December, and the environment is snowy, extremely snowy and cold. Imagine trying to fight this war in a situation where, look, if you're the Germans, I don't even know how they muster enough courage to fight this last battle, this last major battle, because you know you're losing, right? Even if this battle, this desperate battle, has any success, you're probably still going to lose the war. Okay, even though the Germans create a bulge in the line, they're not able to defeat the Allied troops. Oh no. Actually, oh yes. All right. So the American and British troops are able to hold off this last attack, and this is when they start to enter into Germany. Okay. When they get into Germany, this is where the Allies discover the concentration camps. You saw a little bit on the video yesterday in Spielberg's The Last Days documentary about what they experienced there in the concentration camps. And remember, we showed you this graphic before. But remember, a lot of the Jews who were imprisoned in concentration camps and who died there come from Eastern Europe. Originally, in Western Europe, there aren't that many Jews, okay? But the concentration camps are going to be used for a variety of reasons. One thing you saw, medical experimentation. Medical experimentation. Yesterday, the one lady talked about what did the Nazis try to do to her? What medical experiment did they... What is it? Change her eye color. They were like, they believed blonde-haired, blue-eyed people were the superior race, and they're like, we want to know if we can change somebody's eye color. By the way, those experiments, not only did they not work, but what did they do to some people? They blinded them, okay? And the one lady talked about she was basically left in a cell for several days with little to no light. She's sitting in water. She has to use the bathroom in that water. She drinks from that water. It's disgusting. All right. Even know any other medical experiments they conduct on people there? They did a lot of weird experiments if they had the opportunity on twins because they wanted to see if they like shared any experiences or what have you. Were you going to say something else, Bella? Yes, one of the things they look for are ways to quickly and easily sterilize women, particularly Jewish women. And you saw that in the video yesterday. The one doctor who talks about they're looking for ways to do this more quickly so that Jews wouldn't be able to reproduce. One of the other things, and this is fascinatingly strange, they wanted to see what human beings could endure in extreme circumstances of heat and cold. So they would expose them to seriously high and low temperatures. One of the things they do, and in Germany, the winter gets pretty cold at nighttime, and they would leave Jews, they would strap them to a gurney wearing no clothing, and they'd leave them overnight out there to see what would happen when the temperatures got really low, and they would also pour buckets of water over them to make the process even more damaging, because they wanted to see what can a human being endure in extreme cold. How will they last? How will they be able to recover? Wow, that's pretty messed up. They would also expose them to diseases just to see if they could cure them. Now, yesterday, the video, the doctor they interviewed is very interesting. He said, one of the things he said was, if you were a doctor, working in a concentration camp was a very good place to work. Why would he say that? There's a reason he said that. What do you mean? Keep talking about it. All right, a couple things. And you skipped one step, but you're right about this. Literal says, and he's right, he says, look, you got an unlimited amount of test subjects and human beings. All right. Could you do those types of medical experiments under normal circumstances? No, we have ethical standards, and we're like, we're not going to let you do that to people. And so he said, look, camps are great places because the Nazis didn't care what happened to these people. And if they die as a result, you've always got more. So they found this to be a really good place. Now, what's scarier is that after the war's over, the Allies take a lot of the data from the medical experiments and they use that, because they're like, well, the experiments are already done, so we might as well take the information and learn from it. All right. So you get medical experiments. All right. Slave labor as well. Slave labor. When initially people got to a concentration camp, they separated them into two lines. The one line was people who were going to die, and which people did they kill almost immediately? What is it? The elderly, but not just the elderly. Who else? The very young ones. You saw yesterday the one lady talking about her and her mother and her younger brother went to a camp, and she said, I held on to my 2-year-old brother, and I said, I'll never let him go. I'll never let him go. And she's got her younger brother taken from her, and her mother and her younger brother are put into a separate line, and they're immediately killed. And she was old enough to where she would be able to work. All right, they're like, look, we're not going to give you a whole lot of food, but we're not going to waste resources on somebody who can't work. So they're going to use them for slave labor. Of course, some Jewish women were not subjected to labor. They were singled out for other reasons. What happened to them? Not sterilization. What do you think would happen to a woman if she was really attractive? Yeah, she would be basically used as a sex slave. She'd be forced to have sex with certain German officers. And German officers would do that. If they saw somebody they thought was attractive, they're like, hey, right her, take her out of the line. I'm keeping her. Right? And they would put her in a separate location. And she would not undergo a lot of the things that other Jews would undergo, except she would be subjected to repeated rape. Ooh. Okay. Now, the camps themselves, there are camps all over Europe that are built. And you saw yesterday the number of barracks at these individual camps. Check this out. A lot of these that are built, the ones in green they just labeled them as concentration camps here. But in these camps, they often were trying to use them for slave labor. Those are the ones that are trying to get productivity out of, because you don't have to pay them. And like Literal said, there's always more of them. All right. And if they die, you can always replace them with somebody else. The red ones, though, are places primarily where people would be going just to get executed. right? Basically, there, it's like more of them are dying than anything else. We'll talk about Dr. Mengele later on, but he's one of the chief experimenters at Auschwitz. So don't worry about him right now. Ultimately, though, to kill these people, they would gas them and then burn them. And we saw some of these chambers yesterday that they used. These were where they burned the bodies in. And if you've never smelled burning human flesh or animal flesh before, it's a disgusting smell, right? And these these temperatures would get really hot and basically burn the flesh and to an extent the bones as well. And ash goes around everywhere. Now, do you think people in neighboring towns, to what extent were they aware of this? Do you think they knew what was going on at these camps? They did know. And it's really frightening. Think back to when we talked about early, remember, who did they gas first before the war ever started? Who did they do the experiments on? Sterilization and gassing. People who were mentally infirm or simply who wouldn't work or couldn't work. And the T4 program sterilized those people and then gassed them. But remember, even the little children knew that, hey, if you're not careful, if you don't act right, you'll end up in one of the ovens. Right? So people knew what was going on. Now, after World War II was over, a lot of people claimed that they didn't know. And American military, what they would do to a lot of these towns is they had the people of towns around that area, they would march them through the camp and say, look, you say you don't know? Well, now we're going to show you specifically what would happen. And there was one town, I'm trying to think of the name, I have to look it up, but in particular, the mayor of a town tried to claim they had no idea what was going on, and so the American military marched them through the camp. And the next day, after they'd been marched through the camp, the mayor and his wife hung themselves because they couldn't live with the guilt. They knew, right? You see here the death toll for the Jews, most of them coming from Eastern Europe. Jews from other locations, like I said, there weren't that many, but that doesn't diminish it or anything. But you can tell that most of the Jews had resided in Russia or Poland. Right? The death toll, we looked at these numbers too, but 67% of Jews before the war are not going to make it, and they're not going to last for to the end of the war. And you saw some of them yesterday at the end, even when the war was over, they're marching the Jews to different locations. And the one guy said, we're trying to help our friend, and we'd all made a pact that we would stand up for each other. And the guy pulls out his pistol and says, if you don't get out of the way and let me shoot him, I'm going to shoot all three of you. And imagine dealing with that as a young person. It'd be tremendously difficult. This is a picture right here where initially they're getting off the trains, and you heard yesterday the women talking about being on the railroad cars that originally had been designed for cattle. And they're in the railroad car. The trip takes over 36 hours, and they're in a train for that long. They're packed in there. It's hot, all right? People are sweating. There's no chance to take a shower. You have one bucket for human waste, and that filled up pretty quickly, they said. And what's even more bizarre is, you ever smelled human waste that's not been submerged in water? It's pretty disgusting. Now imagine being in a hot, sweaty environment, enclosed environment, and people are just all over each other. And after that bucket fills up, you just go wherever you can, and it's pretty disgusting. Right? By the way, how did they get them in the railroad card so easily? Where did they tell them they were going? They didn't tell them the truth that they were going to a camp. They get them out of the ghetto by saying, we're going to take you. How many people want to go work in a vineyard? And you're like, oh, I'll do that. They tricked them into getting in the car. They're always deceiving them to some extent, because if you make them think that you're going to live through this, they'll go wherever you want them to go, right? But if they had any idea that they were going to die, what do you think people would have done? They would not. They were not going to get on the train, that's for sure, and they potentially would fight back. All right. We'll pick up with more with this on Monday when we have everybody back together.